Hello and welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. So today I have Jane Lusby, who is a principal software engineer over at FutureWay. She is, now I'm probably going to get this wrong because it's quite early over here for me. Maybe I'll go ahead and let her introduce herself. You're in quite different groups, right? You said you were kind of managing the collaboration for the Rust Foundation, I believe.
Yeah,
and also, sorry, let me just real quick. And also, the main reason I bring you on over here is that you also are you the chair, I think, for error handling?
Lead on the project group, yeah.
The lead, okay. Maybe I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself so I don't say the wrong thing, because you're quite involved, so go ahead.
Sure. So, as you already mentioned, I am the project director of collaboration on the board of the Rust Foundation. I am also the lead of the error handling project group and a member of the libs and libs API teams. I'm also involved in the survey team through my foundation work, and a former member of the Clippy team, and I am the maintainer of a completely separate unofficial project called Awesome Rust Mentors that I'm very proud of. Always like to mention. I think that's most everything. I might have missed something. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think your biggest contribution, and I believe you said through React shaving, was error, right? Which really kind of puts you on the path of where you are today.
Exactly. Yeah. I started with Clippy actually, but the error handling work, it was kind of like my passion project, and that's what got me involved in libs and stuff. So I would say my Awesome Rust Mentors and Clippy stuff is kind of what got me involved in the foundation. So it's like multiple paths.
So you started off working on Clippy before you even did error, then?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what happened there? Because this is quite interesting. Because I actually used Clippy a few times. I think it's like a linter, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what happened was when I was first learning Rust, I was looking for ways I could improve and like kind of gain more experience, and figured that contributing to open source projects where with experts already maintaining them would be like a really good way to learn. And so Clippy happened to be the project that I ended up getting involved in. I tried a few and they were like the most responsive. And so I found a nice contribution experience there and made a number of PRs over a couple of months. And then at a meetup, Manish, the lead of the Clippy team, reached out to me and like thanked me for my contributions and like offered to mentor me more and kind of help me get more involved. And that was kind of like the catalyst to like really getting involved heavily. And then eventually I got invited to be a member of the Clippy team and was like just generally doing maintenance, helping review PRs, this and that. But then like over time, like in my personal work, like I was like side projects for work and stuff that I was doing for fun. I was getting like further and further into error handling, and like wrote the error crate and kind of like came to this like understanding that there are like certain parts of the error trait and stuff that should be fixed. And that's how I kind of got into like wanting to create the project group for error handling and getting more involved in the standard library maintenance. And over time, I got to the point where I just didn't have time to do both and had to pick one. And I decided that I would like to take a break from the Clippy stuff and focus on the error handling stuff. And they were very, very nice and positive about it and supportive. And so it was good to kind of be able to step away and do what was most interesting to me at the time.
So I'm kind of curious though, as a beginning Rust person myself, like what was your contributions that you made to Clippy in the very beginning? Do you remember?
Not very well. It was like small things like implementing a specific lint or fixing some like bugs in like lints. It was really basically just like going through the issue tracker and searching for like help wanted and good first issue issues and finding the ones that looked like bite-sized and like something I like felt like I already knew mostly how to handle, and just like doing them. I sadly don't remember the specifics. It's been a couple of years.
Okay. So you did that for quite a while, and somebody offered to mentor you. Did you just reach out directly, you said, or he said, hey, I would love to help you out?
Yeah,
in
he reached
mentorship?
out. Like I was at a San Francisco Rust meetup, and he just like walked up to me and was like, "Hey, you're Jane Lusby." And like, of course I know who he is. He's Manish. He's the person who runs the meetups and maintains the Clippy group. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, how does he know who I am? Like, I just did a couple of random PRs, but like they pay attention. They like he recognized me. He knew my name from my contributions, and he I'm guessing he probably like saw me in the guest list and was like, "Oh, this is like one of our Clippy contributors. I'm gonna go say hi." And so he just did it all on his own. It was really impactful, I would say. Very appreciative of that.
What kind of mentorship did he bring to you?
Mostly encouragement. Like he would tell me like it's a good idea. Like it would be I would have like an idea or something. I'd be like, "Oh, you should blog about this," or I would be like talking about how I want to get better at public speaking, and he's like, "Oh, you could like." I think he suggested I give a talk on like a contribution tour, basically talking about my experience getting involved. And I actually did give that talk at the Rust meetup in the Bay Area and at Colorado Gold Rust. And that actually mostly talks about the same thing that we're talking about right now. It goes over like talking about how Manish got me involved and everything. But just generally like answering questions, like if there's like, hey, who's the person to talk to for this? Like generally like being a guide so I know how to like navigate the project. Being someone who I can talk to when I have like, hey, can you like vibe check this thing I've been thinking about? Tell me if you think this is a good idea or not. And just kind of generally being a friend, I would say.
It's interesting. When I think about mentorship for starting to work out in a new language, I usually think about really teaching how to use the language, but this is more on like how to get through the community, it seems like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was never like there has definitely been times where I've asked about like specific language things, like where it's like how does this work? But I think by that time I was already getting quite familiar with Rust and didn't need a substantial amount of like teaching around the language. And so like definitely the main thing that I was like new to that needed a lot of more experience with was just being involved in open source, and particularly like the Rust community. Because I feel like, I don't know if this is like generally true, but my expectation is that most open source communities are pretty unique in how they operate. And so like you kind of have to learn the ins and outs of each one in order to be able to navigate it effectively.
Yeah, and I say definitely the gatekeeping about like what comes in, what doesn't come in to certain places is also quite unique,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about core, right? Because there's a lot of things like, okay, if we add this, then that means we have more responsibility. Is it really worth it? This kind of discussion has to happen. And that's either one person or I think in Rust, it's like a community of people with RFCs and lots of discussions going on.
Yeah. There's like different teams that control different parts of the project. So it's a pretty interesting setup, and it's somewhat ad hoc, I would say.
I think it's also quite unique. I don't know how many other languages do it this style, but it seems like there's no central person who's like yes and no. It's just like like at Python, you have that BDFL which stepped down recently, but for us, it's never been some kind of central person that was like, yes, this is the one. Like even the creator kind of is not really involved so much, as far as I know. I haven't heard about him ever working on anything recently.
I think he's still involved with the community a little bit. I think like he goes on social media and talks to people. But yeah, as far as I know, he doesn't do any contributions. It hasn't for a while.
I can't imagine like starting something and just that's quite popular and then just kind of not being so involved as other people. That's just hard for me to understand. But I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from him. But yeah, maybe we could talk more about like what was going on when you started working on AnyError, right? So, like you mentioned in the Rust conference talk that you gave, that this was kind of a yak shaving thing, where it's like I guess you encountered something with errors, and then you're like, this is not good. I have to improve this. Something like that was probably the story. Can you talk about this? Like, what was the project and kind of what happened?
Yeah. So the specific thing was I had this CLI tool that basically like abstracted over the build system at one of my previous places of employment, and tried to like make the experience because like it was like all the builds were done remotely on VMs that had like a very specific environment, and so there's like a bunch of ad hoc code for like syncing and running the commands to the other machine. And I tried to basically make a nicer CLI for that rather than just like some bash scripts. And was really frustrated with the error handling that I was like trying out all the different libraries. I remember trying out failure and trying out ThisError and snafu and like having all of them at once and anyhow. And generally it felt like all of them like didn't have exactly what I wanted. And then around this time, I was also contributing to a crate called Tracing, which is a like instrumentation / logging library / framework, and ended up writing a library called Tracing Error, where tracing. So the I guess bit of background, tracing it's not just like logging like events. It also has this concept of like units of work in progress that are basically represented with spans. So you have this guard type, like RAI. I'm not sure, like these are like terms that people are familiar with for the most part. Basically, like you at the start of a function, you construct a span, and then when the span is dropped at the end of the function, it's like exiting the span. And then all your log messages that happen when that span is open are associated with that span and every other span that you're currently in, like in the functions that are calling you and stuff. And so what I wanted to do was be able to capture a backtrace of all the spans that are currently active and then put that backtrace in an error. And so like the nice thing with these spans is that you can have like runtime information in them, like paths, for example. Like if you have a function that like one of the arguments, you can like log the arguments of the function when you enter it. And so you can kind of see like which functions you were in and what the state was in those functions if you like figure all the spans correctly. And I had this type that I was really excited about and I wanted to use it, and it's just like it couldn't integrate it with any of the error handling libraries that existed. And the like after like digging into it and really figuring out like what do I need, where do I want this, like I realized that I needed two things. So first of all, like anyhow is kind of like the appropriate thing for like where I wanted to capture this by default. Where anyhow, it can wrap an error and it will guarantee capture of a backtrace. Like if your error doesn't have a backtrace, it'll capture one with the anyhow error. And if it does have a backtrace, it'll skip capturing it and just refer to the backtrace the error already has. And I wanted to be able to, in addition to capturing a backtrace, I wanted to also have a span trace. And I would ideally, I would also be able to check if the error already had a span trace. So that's where error comes in, where it kind of fills in that first piece, where instead of having just a backtrace, that is like the extra piece of configuration data that's being or like context data that's being captured when an error is being like reported, aka like converted to an anyhow error, or like I guess declared ready for reporting, or like only interested in reporting. There's a lot of ways you can use the library and think about it. But when you're like, okay, I'm probably just gonna report this error, so I don't really care what type of error it is anymore. I just want to throw it in this catch-all bucket and then report it later. I want to be able to have custom types that I can capture, and then I wanted to be able to control the format of the actual error report at the end to include the extra information that I captured. And so that's fundamentally the difference between error and anyhow. And error, instead of having just a backtrace, has a trait that is like the format a report using yourself and the error and a formatter. And it instead of carrying the backtrace in the report type, which is the equivalent to the error type in anyhow, it's just called report because like that's how I like to think about it. It captures like a trait object. Like you'll install a function that will construct the trait object, and then it will, whenever it creates an error, it'll construct these trait objects. It'll be like a box-dyn error handler, and that type, when it's constructed, it's your own type that you're defining, and you can have it just like call backtrace capture or call span trace capture or whatever, and get all this context that you need, and store it, and then at the end, when it's printing, it'll pass the error back into that type and be like, okay, now print me. And you'll be able to like access the error and say, oh, did you already have a backtrace? If not, okay, print my backtrace, et cetera, for span trace. I feel like I got a bit away from myself. What was the original question?
I wish I could remember now. I think it was more about like what was the start of AnyError and why did you create it? But
oh yeah,
what was the project you're working on, and like what was the issue that came up that
it was being able to have extra context and control the formatting of errors. So like configurability within anyhow was the first thing, and then similarly, like there's another RFC that I'm working on for the error trait to kind of let it so you can have any type of context like a span trace through an error trait object instead of only getting backtraces.
Yeah, I think I wish there was a way that we could settle on like one kind of central crate or a couple of crates that you can say this is the crate that you should be using because. But then again, it's also kind of good that we're kind of open in the community about whichever trait you want, or sorry, whichever crate you want to use. Because I was looking at failure and I was like, this looks pretty nice. And then I saw more in the failure that failure was kind of deprecated. Like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't be using that one.
Failure is the crate that came before anyhow, right? So like in the history, failure was first, and then after the lessons that were learned there, they revamped the error trait in the standard library, and then they introduced, once that kind of happened, they introduced anyhow, which was the same stuff, but based on the error trait that had been updated with the changes that were kind of like pioneered in failure with its fail trait. And then that led next to anyhow. And also like failure had a fail derive that basically got split out and became ThisError. Not direct. I'm not sure if it's like 100% causal or like following, but I'm fairly certain that's kind of the evolution of things.
Okay, it's good to understand. But then error kind of came up because you said that anyhow was lacking, right?
Well, yeah, error came out because anyhow didn't have like the customizability that I wanted. Yeah.
Okay. So if I were to pull in a specific crate for handling errors, you're saying like maybe anyhow is probably okay enough, but if you want to do some more customization, you should definitely take a look at error. Is that how you would kind of say?
Yeah, because like by default, like if you don't use the customizability of error, the default stuff that does is exactly identical to anyhow. And it's also like specifically designed to be like easy to drop in and replace. So like it's perfectly fine, I think, to like start with anyhow as like the reasonable starting point. And then if you're like, oh, actually I need this extra, I want to be able to change the format of the errors when they're printed, then you go and drop in error instead.
Okay, it's good to know because I feel like there's just too many choices, and this makes it easier for me to understand. But error is not just error, right? There's a lot of other crates that are with it. Like specifically, there's Color-eyre, and I think there's a couple other error crates that kind of enhance it, right? So
yeah.
Maybe you can kind of give an intro about all the other surrounding crates.
Well, Color-eyre is the main one, and so Color-eyre is kind of my like grab bag customized version of Air that tries to do like all the nice to have things that you would want on top of Air that are maybe like not reasonable like default starting points for people, like what you would want to pull in. So like having all the terminal output be colorized, having that tracing integration. Like not everyone is going to be using tracing, so having that kind of hooked in isn't necessarily wanted by people. Being able to insert extra like custom sections is one of the really nice things that Color-eyre gives you. So I have like some cool demos working with commands where like in the case of an error, it grabs the stood out and the stood error of the command and puts those as sections like following the error message. So it's kind of like all like nicely segmented and
so you can see like what was the input, what was the output of this function, so you have more of an idea about what happened.
Yeah. And you can have like a section showing like what was the command that got run, and you don't have to like try and find a way to fit these all into like error messages that fit on like these like single lines or whatever, which I really prefer to keep the error messages concise and just describing the specific condition that was like preventing you from making progress on whatever. And so it should just be like command returned non-zero status, and then like command like you're like unable to read file or like parse something or whatever like the specific issue was. And then if you have like the more context, that shouldn't be just like shoved in an error message because you want the information. It should be separately displayed as like its own piece of information.
Okay, that's good to hear. I may take a look at error now because I feel a lot more comfortable in Rust than I used to. I just wanted to say, listen, default error handling was just not good. I need to have something. I want to just put question marks everywhere instead of actually having to handle things or do unwrapping and all this kind of stuff. So I'm happy that I could just throw in AnyError. I think it's called AnyError, right? I think that was the one I was using.
There's Anyhow, which is the kind of like reporting. It's basically equivalent to box dyn error, so it's like you can store any error, right? And then an error which is equivalent, and there's ThisError, which is a derived macro that helps you for like defining your own error types and making it a bit more convenient, so you don't have to have like 4 pages of different trait impls where it's like a bunch of repetition and it's just like very minorly adjusted from impls for every type that you're working with, which can be a little annoying to write over and over again.
Yeah, I think the problem I was having was like you have different types of errors, like IO error, and then I can't remember the other types of errors, and like each error is not the same as other errors.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, having this how definitely made things easier because I didn't have to handle all that kind of stuff. It's just, to me, it's like an error is an error. Like I don't want to have to look at what kind of error it is. I just know that it errored out and then figure out what the heck happened. That was what I was at.
Yeah, that's like, were you writing an application? Or like, I'm assuming like the common breakdown is like if you're writing a library versus an application, though I generally don't like to like focus on that. But like if you're writing like an application or something where basically like you're not writing code that other people are using, then yeah, anyhow is just kind of probably always going to be perfectly sufficient. The issue comes in when you need to like be able to let other people like handle programmatically specific error cases. Then when you're throwing everything in anyhow, it becomes really difficult to discover like what the error cases they should be expecting are, and like nothing's enumerated. That's why people really prefer libraries to export like concrete error types, where it's like an enum that has like specific variants. That's like, these are the 5 types of errors you can have. And so
I was doing FFI actually. So I did all of like my core logic within Rust, and I just exported like a C header from there to just kind of pull in. So I didn't really care too much about the error. Just like if error came in, I would capture like a simple error message, and then I would let I have to think what this was. This was a while back, but like you would just like tell direct a channel like, hey, this thing errored out. Here's the error message, and then I could just kind of report that back. And how I would report that back, I mean, it's up to me because I have the string, right? I could just say, hey, it errored out, and then just kind of crap out from there. Kind of depends on. It was all for me anyway, so it's fine. It was a POC also. I didn't really care too much because it's POC. And then this one was a POC that actually stopped at POC. So not too many times it actually happens. Usually you get a POC and it's like, oh no, this is good for production. Let's kick it out the door. And sometimes they don't even tell you, right?
Yeah, that seems like a very like good fit for just use anyhow, rapid prototype. Don't worry about the errors too much. Like, it's definitely not something I would recommend like universally, but I think in this case that definitely sounds like a good call.
I'm curious though for Color-eyre, right? Because I know that at least for some, I think even languages, right? Like they have like the coloring in the interactive prompts. Like, does the Color-eyre actually work in like basically all types of environments, such as like Windows and Mac and Linux? Because I know sometimes things will work in Mac or Linux, but maybe not in Windows because there's a different type of coloring involved, right?
Yeah, I think that it like the old version I think was actually more compatible than the current version. I think a while back we switched it so it requires like the terminal code emulation, which I think is like only available on Windows 10. Like the older versions of Windows have their own very distinct API for how they enable colors, where you have to do like calls to the terminal to like switch on the colors, and you can't necessarily like with like the other platforms, you can just insert the color codes into the string that you're displaying. And so like having like the old APIs would like making an API that is compatible with that older version of Windows coloring requires like puts very strict limits on like how you can colorize the output. And so we went with just the version that inserts the color codes. but it should work on basically all modern platforms.
Now we're saying modern, right? So this means no teletype.
I mean, it would work on old Linuxes probably, but like just not old Windows versions, because the old Windows versions don't support the Linux style of terminal color codes.
Now, do you know what version of Windows is that? Is it like pre Windows 7?
I think it's 10, maybe 8. I'm not positive.
Okay.
I feel like if I try and make a guess, it's just going to be a guess.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure people are still using at least Windows 7. I mean, XP. If you're still using XP, I don't have much sympathy for you. It's been a while. But 7, I know there's still some IT places that are still using it, because that was part of my POC. Is this has to work in Windows 7 and up, because enterprises, you got to pay for like 5,000 upgrades, right? So it's something that they really need to consider.
Yeah, I don't think I'm guessing Color-eyre wouldn't work on Windows 7, but you know, you can always customize it, right? You can just like fork Color-eyre and change the terminal codes the way those are handled, and install it with AnyError, and it would still work. So you could, like, AnyError still supports it in theory, I would say, even if Color-eyre does not support it in practice.
Okay. Did we go through any of the other crates that are also in AnyError? Because we did talk about Color-eyre for quite a while.
I mean, that's the main one. There's like AnyError, which is literally just like there for the pun. I mean, that's why AnyError has its name, is because there's a book called AnyError and my name is Jane. Then there is StableError, which is essentially the default error reporter that's built into AnyError. But instead of using std backtrace, which only works if you're on nightly, it uses backtrace-rs backtrace. So it doesn't actually work with the error trait, like, because we can't return a backtrace-rs backtrace through the error trait. But it will still, like, always guarantee the capture in the report type and print that. So like you can still get backtraces unstable with that. I think that's all of them. I don't think there are any other ones. Like, most of the stuff I do is in Color-eyre. There's like color span trace, which is like a dependency of Color-eyre, and there's like indenter, which is a dependency of AnyError and Color-eyre, which both help with kind of the implementation of the nice reporting, like lets you get the formatting well, but neither of those are like really particularly important on their own right.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you try to compartmentalize lots of pieces of AnyError into different crates so that you can just combine them together with some type of glue crate, which I guess is AnyError itself.
I wouldn't say lots. Like, really, AnyError has like the one dependency, which is indenter, which just handles like when you're printing a multi-line error message, it'll indent the subsequent lines as well, and does that with like a bunch of special write impls. And so that is just its own crate because it's usable. I use it in the other customization libraries. I figure it's something that if someone is customizing AnyError, they want to implement the same kind of functionality. Like, that one piece is kind of difficult to write correctly on your own. And so I figured I would just export that for people so that make it easy. And then Color-eyre has color span trace, which is just like emulating the color backtrace format, for which Color-eyre was actually based on color backtrace originally, but emulates that same format, but on the span trace type. And that's just, I mean, that could have been it. That didn't have to be a library. Figured some people might want to use it, but I don't know if anyone ever has. Definitely no one has come asking for new features in it, other than like bumping my dependency versions every once in a while.
Okay. Okay, so you got started on this AnyError, right? And it became more and more popular, I suppose. And so, like, what kind of got you kind of interested further into the error handling group, or was this a group that you started up yourself?
Yeah, I was the person who proposed it and got the charter and started it. Yeah.
That's just a good actually topic to talk about, right? Because people may be interested in starting up their own groups. So, like, what's the process to start a group?
More or less, I think I started attending, or no, did I attend the library meetings? It's been a while since I set this up, so give me a second to try and recall exactly the order of events. But I think I was working on the error handling stuff on its own, like I started with the generic member access RFC, which was like that other half of the error story for like getting custom context in your reports. And then I think around that time, I also wanted to start working on error and core and just like a bunch of related work. And so I proposed the working group to the libs team, and they were positive and supportive of it. And basically, like Ashley Mannix walked me through the process and like showed me the here's the document for how you create a charter for a new working project group. And so I filled that all out and talked to some different people and got some like people who were interested in participating and got that all set up and proposed, and the team approved it. And then suddenly there was a new project group and I was the lead. And so I started organizing meetings and everything, and here we are.
Is it a very taxing and time consuming process then? Or is it just like a process you just kind of follow?
Not really. It was pretty low barrier for entry, I would say. Like I basically wrote, like the charter was maybe like 1 or 2 pages worth of just like question and answer. And like questions were already like provided for you. So it's like, is this going to be like long running or short running? Like who are the people who are going to be involved? What are the goals, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it was just pretty easy from there. We haven't had any project groups be proposed since I started on the libs team. So I don't know if like, I know that when I was doing it, the process was kind of in flux. Like the charter stuff that they had me do was, I think, basically new for when I was doing it. And I'm not sure if like that's exactly the process we're still going to do the next time someone wants to start a project group. But we haven't had any project groups proposals in a while. So.
Okay, so you start up the group, and then how about getting other people onto the group with you? Was there just people that said, "Hey, I really want to join this," and you're like, "Okay, let's go," because or that's all it was at the beginning?
More or less, yeah. People who chimed in on the Zulip, or like people who talked to me directly and were like, "Hey, I'm interested in being involved, doing some work," and like often, what can I do? Where can I help? And awesome, happy to have you. Here are some things you can work on, and just help people get involved. And oftentimes, like set up one-on-ones to like meet every once in a while to see how they're doing and see if I can help with anything. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So maybe we could talk more about kind of like because the group is still quite new, right? I think it was started up just last year, or year before. Is that right?
I think it was last year.
Last year, okay. So what has been going on in the working group since then? If you can give a quick talk about that.
So the main thing we've been focused on is error and core. So like, I can go into like detail on the status of that, like what's been going on there. So basically, like there are a couple of features that are needed to get error into core. They're like the issues that are blocking it. One of them is there's a from impl, like from stir for box 9 error, that when you move error into core and you have to move that impl into alloc because that's where box is defined. And when you do that, it will end up saying, because error is in core and stir is in core, and there is another error impl this is like way too complicated I don't know if this is like going far into too much detail at the moment. Regardless, there was an impl issue where we couldn't move that from impl because of potential overlap between the different from impls, even though it didn't actually happen in practice. So we needed a new compiler feature to like kind of silence that error. Now we also there's a bunch of downcast impls that have box as the self type, and those need to be moved to the alloc crate, but they can't because they're implemented directly on the error type, and that has to be done in the same crate. And so now we're like using lang items in order to kind of move those into a separate crate, like use basically compiler hacks to let us work around the restrictions on coherence. And then the generic member access stuff we still have to resolve, because right now there's fn backtrace on the error trait, and that the function has backtrace in the signature, and backtrace is defined in standard library, and it is very much platform specific. So it's not something that's easy to move to the core library. And so the likely way that we're going to resolve this is by removing the backtrace function and adding generic member access, because generic member access is kind of like a generic version of backtrace where you can access any sort of type from the error. Like you can say, give me like dot context colon, like, angle brackets for the generic parameter, then backtrace, and it'll like see if the type has a backtrace and give that to you. And you can do that with any sort of type instead of just backtrace. And so it's more or less like a superset of the same functionality. We're also working on having a report type built into the standard library, which is not like error report. Error report is like it stores the error, it stores the reporting trait object and any additional context, and then like kind of prints itself together. This is really just doing like the bare minimum of like you take an error and you iterate over its sources and you print each one. And so it's just basically like an adapter to take an error type that has like a display ample that only prints the outermost error, and instead wrap it in this report type that prints all of the errors as its display ample. So it just makes it easier to like properly report an error chain instead of like having to write a for loop or something in order to get all the error messages out of it. Then once the error and core stuff is done, the next big thing that I think we're going to want to work on is integrating the error trait with panic. So right now, if you like unwrap a type that implements error, it'll just print it via the debug trait. And it's not really what you want a lot of the time. Instead, it would really be nice to get a dying error on the other side and then be able to report that by like iterating through the sources, or like, going through generic member access and getting your span trace or whatever out of it, any sort of context that's relevant to the error messages. And so trying to get it so that you can, first of all, panic with an error and get a dying error on the other side, and then try and get some specializations built into unwrap and expect, so that when you do that on a type that implements error, it will actually use this like other panicking mechanism to actually just report the error itself instead of stringifying it and like throwing away the information and giving you just like this garbled debug representation.
So we can look forward to basically better error showing when we're developing our Rust apps in the future, like if we're using Unwrap just to kind of get through.
Yeah, the goal is to get much more consistent reporting all throughout. So like if you're just using simple error types everywhere and you're composing them with sources, you don't lose any of that information when you go to like unwrap it, and you don't have to like be very careful to like print everything the right way.
When I hear you talking about this stuff, it's quite interesting because I think a lot of the teams are like focused on specific aspects, like libs. I think it's working on standard. But in any case, like it seems like a lot of the error group actually has to talk to a lot of people and really get kind of buy-in and definitely a lot of collaboration going on, right?
Yeah, that I've definitely needed to work pretty closely with the compiler team a bit on this, because a lot of the issues that are like preventing this move are like fundamental to the language, and so we need to fix that in order to make it possible. But I would say for the most part, it has still been primarily a libs issue. Like most of the work that we're doing is with like the libs team and just within the standard library.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. That's pretty cool. Like, how has the experience been? Has it been where like you guys propose, hey, this is what we want to do, and then they say, no, you can't do that because X, Y, Z, or?
Yeah, no, it hasn't been. There's been very little kind of conflict of any nature. For the most part, it's been a lot of like waiting. Like it takes time to like get things done. So, but like whenever we've had a specific thing where we need to like talk to the libs team, it's usually them deferring to our expertise, because we've like we explain our logic and like that makes sense. Okay, we agree.
That's great to hear, because usually you have like the most famous people in any IT organization is like the security people, You're like, hey, we want to do this because this is good for our users or this is good for us, and they'll say, no, there's just too much, unknowns. But it's cool to hear that you guys are like, hey, this is what we want to do, and they say, yeah, that sounds great. Let's work together on this. I don't think I hear about that too many times. Usually, it's like a back and forth and saying, okay, you forgot about this, or you need to think about this, or this kind of stuff. It just seems like you guys do your homework and then you come up with a good solution so that you kind of ignore this, or so that you avoid this problem. Or is it just that you guys, or is it just, I'm just kind of curious about that part, right? Because I don't really ever hear this going so smoothly before with other teams.
I mean, there's like a lot of back and forth in like the GitHub issues or like the chat channels where when this work is kind of being figured out within like the error handling project group when we're working on stuff. And a lot of times, like, Libs team members will like participate in those and like kind of help resolve stuff. And like, it's not like these conversations are happening kind of like separately. Like everyone's, I think, working together pretty closely. I mean, like, I'm on the Libs team, right? So like, I'm like there in the meetings every week. And so it in a sense, like, I feel like there's like a conflict of interest where it's like, I don't want to like bias the changes that the project group I'm involved in are getting and like get them approved too easily because I'm also involved in the Libs team. And so I usually try and like stay out of any of our PRs as far as like approving and reviewing them go. But my involvement does make it so that it's like I know how to like work within the Libs team process and how to like escalate things when we need to like bring something to their attention, and like always have like pretty easy time getting feedback and everything.
Okay, it's not that you use this to say, oh, if you talk to this guy, it'll be okay, but if you talk to this guy, maybe it won't be okay. I hope it's not like that, right?
No. Well, I mean, everyone has to agree in order for stuff to go in. And also, like, we haven't really, like, the process by which you get something into nightly is pretty lightweight. Like, we want to make it easy to kind of experiment on things. And so, like, when we want to make one of these like APIs, like make like the std report type, we can like put this on nightly and just have one Libs team member review and approve it. But like when things actually need to become stable, like everyone has to agree on it. And like we haven't really done any major stable changes that I can recall off the top of my head, other than one impl for like arc and reference error for reference to an error. And so for the in a way, we kind of haven't even gotten to that step where there's like the potential for conflict, but it's like extremely unlikely. I mean, there is, in theory, that could happen with the backtrace stuff. We are like ripping out this function, though it is unstable. In theory, contentious, but my impression from talking to people is that like everyone agrees that like, yeah, if we want to move this to core, we shouldn't have this type there because it's like, it just massively complicates things, and we already have a solution for using this type still. And so it's like, it's a slam dunk. So there's generally not any issues with like people trying to stop stuff.
Okay, that's cool. Well, I mean, I don't think it's ever stopped like, oh, we want to cause these people drama. It's always like, no, we want to avoid user issues or compatibility issues, because that's really one of the cores of Rust. Is like, we should never break stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, if there was anything that was going to cause compatibility issues, it would get stopped. Like I would be stopping it personally. Like we take that pretty seriously, but like none of the changes that we're proposing are in any way breaking. What
I am kind of curious about is there any talk about, hey, if we do a Rust 2.0, how would we do it?
Not really. Not except in like joking conversations, I would say. I have not heard anyone seriously proposing a Rust 2.0.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I'm just, because it's been so long, right? There's got to be a lot of technical debt that, not maybe a lot, but there's got to be some technical debt where you're like, if we did it this way, it would just be much better. But we can't do that now.
There's some. Like, there's an unfortunate impl on Box-Stein-error that means that Box-Stein-error is itself not an error, which I would definitely see fixed if we could, but it's already stable. But in general, I would say that we don't have too many cases of that, of like things that we regret. I would say in large part thanks to the addition process. Like when we have problems, like there was an issue with the panic macros where like Stud's panic macro and Core's panic macro in 2018 and 2015 editions, they're two different macros and they have subtly different behavior that can cause some like really like weird and like annoying bugs. And in the 2021 edition, we just like made them the same macro and like fixed the inconsistency and like added some lints to make it like for the areas where you would accidentally like basically report nothing as your error, like are like pretty much impossible to get nowadays on accident. And so like if it weren't for the addition process, that wouldn't have been possible. But because of the addition process, it's not a breaking change because like 90% of the people aren't going to be broken by the changes that we made, like, or like 99%. Like you really have to be like using a specific feature of like panic that's like kind of obscure for like panicking with like non-string payloads. And like for those 1%, the only time it breaks is when they change the addition, which is like opting in to something potentially breaking. And so like we don't generally get stuck with things. There are some limitations, like all the additions share the standard library. And so there's like some, like you can't remove a function from the standard library in the next edition or something, but we can still like deprecate things and generally manage that and have been doing so. So it's not too much of an issue.
Yeah, this idea of additions is kind of like I feel it's a little, when you're talking about this and I'm thinking about it, I feel like it's a little bit of a sneaky way to start making some changes that you want to make without.
It's like a way of coordinating. It's not sneaky. I think it's like, it's if anything, it's more explicit, right? Like you're telling people, and here is where I'm going to make a breaking change. And like people can use the new compiler without using the new addition. So they don't even have to opt in. They can still get compiler improvements over time for their old code and just leave it and never deal with that change if they don't have the time to like do the upgrade. But like for the most part, it's like really easy to do the upgrade, and you just like they even implement migration like Rust fix stuff to like automatically convert the stuff that they broke to the new version. So you don't like half the time you don't even have to do anything. So it's I think it's a very nice system. Works quite well.
No, don't take what I say as a negative thing, but I'm just the kind of person that it gets me in trouble, but I like to just kind of make things maybe a little bit exaggerative, but also very blunt. Okay. So don't take it as a negative thing. It's just like, And I think it's okay, right? I really like the new 2021 edition. I may actually update one of my stuff. So I usually use Rust for FFI stuff. And so I'm thinking about maybe I should just try it out on one of my FFI projects and see how it goes. I think there's not going to be many changes compared to the 2018.
Yeah, this one was pretty minor, so I would be surprised.
Oh, be careful when you say about that, because I had a discussion with Mara, and she was like, no, this is much bigger than you think. And
really?
If you take a look, there's a specific section online that talks about like 2018, like there's the additions book or additions like website link somewhere. And if you look at it, the points that you have in 2021 is much bigger. And she even said, hey, this is much bigger. Like the biggest issue with 2018 was like there was a lot of changes in the wording, right? Async had to come in, await had to come in. But yeah, this one, there's a lot more changes involved, she said.
Interesting.
And they also learned their lesson from 2018. Like, okay, this is how we don't do this, I suppose, is probably what they came up with.
Yeah. We definitely learned a lot of lessons about how to sustainably plan for specific releases. So like not committing to things, I think, was the main lesson. Otherwise, you like have a bunch of people scrambling to try and implement features as volunteers, and it's not a fun time.
I think Mara specifically brought up the point about like, let's not try to release addition around a upcoming feature like the async await, right? That was the big thing.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's a pretty good introduction. Like, is there anything else you wanted to kind of bring up about what the error handling group is doing or what you're doing, or maybe a call out to kind of for some help for something?
No, not at the moment, really. I mean, if I wanted to plug anything, I would plug Awesome Rust Mentors. Like if you're looking to get involved in something, or you're like looking to build more expertise by helping others, then you should definitely like look at signing up as a mentor or a mentee there. I think could always use more mentors, but I don't think there's anything too much in the error handling working group. Though if anyone wants to work on the error handling working group, there is still plenty of other things that we could be working on. So I can definitely help people get involved if they want to.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So if because I think we have probably a good mix. I don't know exactly who the audience is of this podcast, but for me, I'm a beginner, so I'd probably maybe look at the mentor part. But I'm sure there's other people who are more advanced in Rust that maybe are looking at the mentee part would be for me. But for mentors, like how would I know if I'm actually able to be a mentor versus a mentee?
I think just generally, like if you feel like you know Rust well enough to explain it to other people, basically, like if you feel like you've been doing it a while, where you're self-sufficient, then you're probably like plenty advanced enough to be a mentor. And I think like the bar is much lower than people expect. Like I think that being a mentor isn't so much about like teaching other people and being like the most experienced like teacher or like tutor or anything. It's much more about like having the connection with someone else in the community where you can like help each other out. And so I think that even people who are like relatively new to the language can do very well as mentors and like benefit from the experience. Is like, and especially you can always keep it kind of focused to your areas of expertise. So if you're like, I want to mentor people on game dev in Rust, you don't have to know anything about the compiler or how the community works to be able to mentor someone in game dev. If you're already like involved in Bevy or whatever, or you just like you've used Bevy or some other crate and you know how to do it, or you're just a game developer who knows a bit of Rust. Like I think there is lots of opportunities to help people. If you know anything, it's good to share.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm also kind of curious, is like, are these people also similar to, could they also be similar to what your mentor did, where they kind of showed you the ropes about how to maneuver around the community and who to talk to, etc.?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that's probably one of the more valuable. Well, I guess it depends really on what the person is looking for. Like if someone is looking to get involved in the community, then I think that's like very important, is basically what you should be doing. And the type of mentors they should be looking for are people who are like involved in the project. Or I mean, I guess the community kind of, there's like the Rust community of like maintainers and there's the Rust community of users. And so I guess it kind of depends on where you're involved and where you have familiarity. But in general, I would say yes. Yes, it is useful.
Okay. And with that, if there's nothing else on your side, I think we can kind of sign off on here. So I thank you for taking the time to join us.
My pleasure.
Maybe I'll have you back on if there's some more real big updates within error handling, or if there's anything else that you want to talk about, you can feel free to reach out to.
Okay.
All right.
Will do. My pleasure.